good indeed.
Very happy
How
to
are
see you.
Very happy to be here.
I know you are busy and also your country is very busy.
Oh no, don't speak of it. Don't speak of it.
まあ今僕が人生100年時代の日本が初めての国になるって言いましたけど、もう一つ今のに付け加えると、おそらく私は海外でリンダ・グラットンさんという名前を初めてスピーチをした日本の政治家だと思います。まあ今ライフシフト社会保障改革っていうふうに言いましたけど、あの本が日本に与えたインパクトが一つの本のベストセラーに終わらずに日本の社会を変えていく力になったと思いますね。これも面白い縁で僕が厚生労働部会長という社会保障改革を実際に動かすことができる立場になって、今日本というのはこの時期は政府がこれからやっていく基本的な方針を決めていく時期なんです。その基本的な政府の方針の中に私がやってきたことを政府の方針の方に入れていくっていう作業をやっていて、これが形になりそうなところまで来ました。一番分かりやすいのはリバランスっていう言葉を使ったことですね。日本は極度にバランスが崩れた、人口構成も含めてそれを回復していかなければいけない。これが社会保障改革は単純に社会保障のサービスのカット、これが第一の道、そして消費税を上げたりして国民からお金を納めてもらうという負担の拡大、代表的なのは消費税の増税ですね。これが第二の道。これからはそれだけじゃなくて第三の道が必要だと。それがリバランスだと。でそのリバランスというのは何かというと、人生100年時代長く働くことを応援するようなさまざまな制度を入れていこう。そして一人一人多様化した生き方に合わせていくように選択肢をより多く国の制度の中に持っていこう。最も象徴的なのは年金だと思います。今日本の年金は60歳から70歳までいつ年金を受け取るかは国民が選べます。それで60歳までもらうと65歳でもらうよりも 30% 年金はカットされる。そして70歳まで我慢をすると65歳と比べたら 42% アップする。今回さらに拡大をして、例えば60歳から75歳までいつから年金をもらうかを選べるように選択肢を増やす。そうすると70歳で 42% ですから75歳まで仮に伸ばせば年金額は65歳でもらうよりも8割以上増額されるわけです。もう一つ大事なことは、日本というのは世界と違って仕事はあるけど人はいない国です。労働力不足です。だけどこれ以上働いてしまうと扶養控除が得られないからとか、より負担が多くなるから働く時間を抑えよう、そういったことを促してしまうような制度があります。そういったことももう気にせずに働きたい人は働ける。でそれを今止めてしまっているような壁は撤廃をしています。こういった方向がこれから日本の政府の方針に入っています。
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me. And I wanted just to pick up two of the things that you spoke of, which I think are really, really crucial. One is about balance, and the other is about options. Just in terms of options, one of the things that we realized when we wrote this book, and in fact we've since written another book, which takes some of the ideas further, is that as your life lengthens, particularly at a time of incredible technological change that we're seeing here in Japan as well, options become very valuable.
Yeah.
You need to have options so that you can change and experiment as you go through your life. So options become really important, and I think the government plays a really crucial role in creating options for citizens, but also helping people to make choices about, for example, when they retire. But I was also very interested in your word balance, because one of the things that came out of our research, and again is very clear in our new book, is that time, we've always thought about money as our major resource, but actually in a long life, time becomes an extraordinary resource, and how you use time becomes very important. And I think the government plays a role there, both in helping people to use time in the way that's going to work for them, and also not putting too many barriers in. You know, for example, one of the reasons why people don't work over the age of 55 in many countries, apart from Japan, is that companies and governments don't support them to work over 55. So anything that you can do to help people create options, but also to help them balance their time, it is going to be really important. I think that countries are different in terms of, you know, their development, and so the reactions we get are, I think, twofold. The first is pensions. When the book came out, the UK Treasury asked Andrew Scott and I to speak at the UK Treasury, and I think in part it was because we said, as academics, people need to work into their 70s and 80s. And that's not a story that politicians like to give.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, that was an important story, actually, that this is a reality. You know, and when we spoke initially in America, part of the press said to us, but you know, why are you bringing bad news? You know, and we said, we're not bringing bad news, we're just telling you the reality. So I think there's been a long conversations about pensions, and certainly the conversation that you're having in Japan at the moment is not dissimilar from others around the world, because in most countries pensions were built when people lived for 10 years. That's how pension systems were created. So now, when 10 years after they stopped working, now if you live for 30 years, then obviously the pension doesn't work. And so encouraging people to work longer has been, I think, a really important part of the narrative. And certainly in the UK, we are very aware, the data show that over the age of 55, if somebody loses their job, the chances of getting another job is very low. So people are now asking, how might we do that? How might we encourage people and corporations to work longer? The second area, I think, that's really developing is this notion of lifelong learning. So I sit both at the World Economic Forum and on a group in the US that looks at some of the implications of longevity. And when people have long lives, and at a time of huge technological disruption, they need to go through education on many times.
Lifetime education.
Lifetime education, and most countries don't do that. They don't provide for that. So there's a lot of conversations, I think, going on about the provision of lifetime learning. And I've been speaking to both governments, but also to, I addressed recently the people who run business schools around the world and said, you know, we need to do this. We've got to provide lifelong education. So I think those are the two areas that are really being discussed at the level of government policy are pensions and lifelong learning.
今の話を聞いてね、だから日本にとってこの人生100年時代はニューフロンティアなんだ、前向きに捉えるべきなんだって改めて確信をしたのは、日本で国民に世論調査をして、あなたは何歳まで働きたいですかって言ったときに、最大の回答は 42% の働ける限り働きたい。この話をアメリカでもしましたけど、アメリカもみんな驚きましたね。この日本人の持っている働くということに対する前向きな思い、この勤勉っていう日本人の強み、これが戦後の発展も支えた原動力になりましたけど、これからの人生100年時代を前向きな時代に、長生きをリスクとしない時代にしていく最大の原動力は日本人の強みの中にあると改めて思いました。で、もう一つのそのリカレント教育、学び直し、これは同じように課題があると思いますね。最近も今取り組んでいるのが教育訓練給付金っていう雇用保険の中から出るお金があります。で、そこには国ももちろん支援もしてるんですけど、日本でいうと分かりやすいのはユーキャンとかですよね。あれ実は相当な女性が出てるっていうところを多くの人知らないですよね。もっと多くの方に活用してもらいたいです。 でここに絡んでくるのはこの政府や国のコミュニケーションの戦略、国民に必要な情報を届けていくっていう、これがものすごく大事だなっていうのは最近改めて痛感しますね。年金もなんと70歳で 42% を選択しているっていう人は国民の 1% しかいない。政策や支援策っていうのは作って終わりではない。届けきることが最後まで考えなきゃいけない。知られていないっていうことは存在しないことと同じですから。
Yes, I think that's absolutely crucial. That people don't just there cannot just be policies. There also has to be action on the part of individual citizens. And this question of lifelong learning, the government can play a role there. And I see that the government can play a role. I see across the world governments playing a role in two ways with regard to lifelong learning. One is to provide funding. And so many people, for example, look to the Singapore example there, of how Singapore government provides funding every year for people to engage in some sort of a learning activity. But the other way is, as you say, to help people navigate and to help people make choices. And in a labour market as we have, where jobs are changing, some are becoming automated, some new jobs are being created, it's very useful for people to have an idea of what are the jobs I should be training for. And so we've written, and others have written extensively about how in Germany, for example, the German government works really at the level of local communities to help them understand where the jobs are going to come from, and therefore what sort of skills they should have and how they should navigate. So I think for citizens to make wise choices, they need to be able to give time themselves, but they also need to understand where are these jobs coming from? What should I be doing now to prepare myself for the future? We talked earlier about this idea of balance, and when your life elongates to 100 years, that just provides more hours and more days. And in the three-stage life, we think about full-time work, full-time education, full-time work, full-time retirement.
Yeah.
But in a multi-stage life, there's an opportunity to redistribute time. So, for example, to take some of your potential retirement time and take it when you're 40. To take 6 months off, let's say, when you're 40. Or to take some of your education time and redistribute it back further into your whole life. So that provides an opportunity for balance. And this is where I think Japanese corporations have now to focus. Yeah. Because the way that Japanese working systems are created has certainly reinforced diligence, but that's been at the expense of balance, life balance. And maybe that's something that we now need to consider. How do you provide a balanced life that would enable you to work right up through into your 70s and 80s? And I think that's a challenge both for corporations and perhaps for the government.
Yeah. 今もう一回言ったことはタイムですよね。時間。だからこの人生100年時代っていうのはもちろんお金って大事なんですよ。これ絶対大事。だけどその時間っていう価値がものすごく高まる時代なんですよね。それでバランスっていうこのリバランスっていう言葉からバランスっていうことも今日何度もリンダさん触れてますけど、日本でバランスっていう言葉と人生100年時代で考えると、ワークライフバランスっていう言葉ありますよね。あれももしかしたらもう一回問い直す必要があるかもしれないって思うのは、ワークライフバランスっていうものを考える前に本当に自分が好きなことを見つめ直す。これがすごく前向きに長く社会の中に参加する、働く、そういう時代にはそれを最初に自分と向き合う必要がある時代だなと思いますね。 だから僕は政治の世界に大変だし、ワークライフバランスの真逆でね、休みがない、ワークライフバランスどころかワークワークワークですけど、だからこれをワークアズライフって言えるかもしれないけど、もしかしたらそれってすごく幸せなことで、それぐらいするに値すると思ったからこの世界を選んでるわけです。で、政治にしかできないことがあると信じてるから、周りからどんなイメージが悪い世界だと思われても、この世界にしかできない社会のインパクトがある。だから最近思うのは、政治ってどうやったら関心持ってもらえるかなとか、あんまりこう気にする必要ないんじゃないかなと。だって俺が好きでやってんだもん。今の時代 SNS もあるから何やってたって言われるんだから。だけど自分の中で俺はこれが好きだからっていう以上に強い理由はないんですよ。でそれを見つかると、結果として会社が変わったり仕事が変わったりしても、ずっと自分が好きなことをやっている長い人生って考えると、人生100年楽しいね。
I was just saying earlier that Japanese, to have a stable democracy at the moment in the world is a great honor, and to have politicians who believe in the long term is also a very fortunate position to be in. I asked my MBA students last year, I teach a class of 100 MBA students at London Business School, including 35 nationalities.
Wow, such a diversity.
Yeah, very diverse.
Yeah.
6 Japanese as well, by the way. And I said, how many of you would like to be politicians?
How many?
None. And this is a challenge. You know, this is a serious challenge for democracy, actually.
Zero.
It takes some very special people to want to be politicians. Most people want to be chief executives. What we've been doing in our new book is to take the conversation a bit further and really to look at how does some of these options play out for individuals over their life, and what does it mean for education, for corporations and for governments. And I think what's become really apparent in our new book is the role that government plays. I'm a psychologist, so I really see the world from the level of the individual. And I don't really ever see governments, I can't really see how governments play a role in but actually when we really thought about this and spoke to governments around the world, it became apparent that at a stage like this of enormous transformation, I know you spoke about this in your speech in Washington, that we are in a period of extraordinary transitions.
Yeah.
Governments can play a role and really must play a role. And we saw governments playing a role, firstly, to narrate the future. The very fact that you're prepared to say people should be working into their 70s, there is no other government that is prepared to say that. But that's the truth. Yeah. And I think governments need to be honest with their citizens about what the future is, because then people can start preparing for that. So part of a government role is to build a narrative about the future, and then the second is to provide the means for people to exercise choice. And of course that depends on the government itself, but those two things, providing a narrative or a story about the future, and also enabling people to exercise choice, that becomes really crucial at a time of transition like this.
2冊目の本は政府の役割がすごく大事だっていう話だったけど、一つは政府がやらなきゃいけないことって言ったのは真実を語ること、ファクトを語ること、そしてファクトに基づいて国民が前向きになる選択肢を提示して、しかもその選択肢がちゃんと選択されるように前向きな選択になって人々が勇気づけられる、そういうふうにしていくっていうことが政府の役割だとすごく大きいっていう話でしたけど、そうなってくるとこの時代ってメディアの役割って大きいですね。それと何がファクトで何がフェイクか、これをジャッジするのがすごく難しい時代の中で、政治でさえも本当のことを言ってるのかっていうことが問われている。 だからこの数年で今までなかったことが起きているのは、政治家に対するファクトチェックっていうのが、これはもうどこの国でも多分民主主義国はやってますよね。そういった中で長くなる人生を前向きに、たとえ厳しいことでも正直にそれを語っていく。だけどやっぱり人って苦しい話って聞きたくないんですよね。だけど政治って語らなきゃいけない時もあって、でもその中で一番大事なのは、これがもしかしたらアカデミズムと政治の違うところかもしれないけど、絶対政治家として忘れちゃいけないのは、どんなに理論上正しいことでも人の気持ちが動かなかったら絶対に動かない。だから常に考えるんです。どのようにデリバーしたらいいのか、届けたらいいのか。今回の社会保障改革でリバランスという言葉を使って、80年型のライフサイクルから100年型に変わっていくから、経済社会全体の構造を歯車を回すようにこうリバランスさせていく必要があるんだと。でこのアプローチも合わせてないと、負担と給付の見直しの話ばっかりはできないんだっていうことも、どうやったら100年時代っていうのが前向きな時代だと思ってもらえるかっていうところに心を砕いたというところがありますね。
I think that this question of a transition and a change is really sits at the heart of this. That actually we are living at a time when people are living a great deal longer, but also technology is changing the way that we live and the way that we work. And Japan is at the forefront of both longer lives, but also technology.
Yeah.
And that's an extraordinary combination.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions that I'm exploring, and we've explored in our new book, is what does it mean to be human? In this period of incredible transition, what is it that separates from us as robots, but also what is it that separates us from people who only lived 40 or 50 years as they would have done, you know, in the last century, and certainly in Japan. And it seems to me that there are three areas that we have to think about, and we've spoken about much of this afternoon. The first is, being human is about having a narrative about the future, having your own story. And as we've described, governments play a role in helping people build an honest narrative about what it is, you know, to have a future. The second is, being human is really about learning and exploring. You know, that's what separates us from every species, really, is our excitement about learning. And I think what we're realizing is this is a lifelong activity. It's not just something that children do, it's something that we all do. But the third thing which I want to very briefly speak about is being human is about relating to others. You know, relating to our family, relating to our community. And it seems to me that that's an area that's also in enormous transition. When people think about Japan, they imagine that Japanese women don't work. And of course this is not correct. Japanese women are entering the workplace.
We can count ladies.
Yes, yeah. So women are entering the workforce in Japan. And but at the same time, we also have to build institutional arrangements that support women and support families and support communities. And I really want to just finish by saying, I think that Japanese corporations could do more there. We've spoken in this conversation a great deal about the role of government, but I think that corporations could do more to realize that being human is also about being part of a family, being part of a community. And when we think about how do we distribute our time, bringing up the next generation and being part of a community is a very important part of being human. And I think that that will be our next big challenge, really, is how do we not just reform our work and our financial fiscal policy, but also how do we rethink what it is to be a family and what is it to be a community.
人生80年時代だったらもうその後年金でいいけど、だからそういう大きなその今までの幸せが 今の不幸せにつながっていることもあるっていう、これずっとレールからの解放でも言い続けてきたメッセージなんだけど、これはぜひ日本の企業の皆さんに一緒になって国が進めている人生100年時代の大きなこのシフトっていうのが一緒に今経済界も変わろうとしてますけどね。だけどリンネさんも言ったようにトゥースロー、遅すぎる、これを少しでも早めていきたいですね。あとはなんか次の本がね、人間とは何かっていうのに近い、そういったところまで話がいってるじゃないですか。これも実は僕がさっき話したワークライフバランスとかを考える以上に、自分は本当に何が好きなのか、不安よって言われるんですよね。あなたは誰ですか。それがすごくその選択を力に変えられるか、それともむしろ選択を怖い変化だと思ってしまうか、変化を前向きに捉えられるかどうかっていう境目は、自分が何をしたいということを思ってるかどうかっていうこともすごく言えるのかもしれませんね。自分が好きなものを選べる人生を送りたいじゃないですか。だからまさにそれって選択っていうものと人間って何なのかっていうところが、そこで僕はつながってくるんだろうなと思いますね。Anyway, thank you.
So
Thank you
nice
for
to
your
see you.
time.
Thank you for your
Yeah,
time.
as you said, time is precious.
Time is precious.